Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Gross, and I welcome you to the second in the MyCP webinar series, which are a set of presentations about CPRN research intended to give you an opportunity to learn from the investigators and ask questions. Let me just quickly talk about our agenda for this evening. I am going to do a quick overview of CPRN and MyCP. If you joined the last one, this will be repetitive for you, but I will go pretty quickly, but feel free to tune out during that period of time. And then I will turn it over very quickly to Dr. Gary Noritz, who is going to talk about a report from the CPRN Cerebral Palsy Registry. And then we'll open it up for questions. So I think we'll be getting to Q&A somewhere around 8:30 or thereabouts. Okay, so the Cerebral Palsy Research Network's mission is to improve outcomes that people with CP value most. That's underlined, and I'll explain why, through high quality clinical research and quality initiatives. So I say value most because we spent a bunch of time in 2018, I think it was, maybe it was 2017, Michelle can correct me, where we went through a process to set a patient-centered research agenda for cerebral palsy so that your input would drive what we do, and that does drive our research agenda. What is it? It is a collaborative network, so it's not actually an entity. It's a group of centers, hospitals, and universities with clinicians, therapists, researchers, and patient advocates all working together to conduct research that improves outcomes for people with CP. The data for the network is brought to a data coordinating center that's based at the University of Utah. So we have a data coordinating center there in the university's Population Health Sciences Department. And it really has two fundamental pieces of infrastructure: a clinical registry that characterizes patients' interventions and outcomes built into the electronic medical record system. That's what you're going to hear most about tonight. And then a community registry that is meant for you as people in the community to be able to take surveys, and so we can follow outcomes long term. MyCP, which is the other name you see here, is a brand owned by CPRN, and it's basically a web portal that we operate to bring the community into research. Basically offers four things. It offers participation in the community registry, which is really just surveys. It allows you to participate in discussions about research. So there's a whole forum associated with it that is not indexed by Google, but is a private forum that allows you to discuss with other people in the community, clinician researchers, about research priorities, to get involved in research. It provides news about CPRN studies, and we're just starting to build a set of tools, the first tool you get exposed to when you sign up, which are to help you navigate your medical care and to navigate having CP. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up at mycp.org. CPRN is built to accelerate research. This is our research pipeline with new concepts at the left-hand side, and you can see each bubble represents a study idea. They go through an approval process with our investigator committee. They seek funding, and then they start to get implemented, and that's the study execution portion of this. As you can see, we've got the CPRN registry up here in the top right of this blue study execution portion. And again, that's the part that Dr. Noritz will be talking about tonight. And then we try to move the findings from our studies off into manuscripts and publications so that we can influence the field. So we've got a number under development. This defining the CPRN registry just got accepted for publication and will be appearing in online, available to everyone in the next couple of weeks. So that'll be our third publication. We're excited about that. And then we try to take the learning from that and bring it back to the beginning of the funnel. So this is the map of where the sites are. Dr. Noritz is going to spend a little more time on this. I actually realized I need to update this because Cincinnati Children's has just become an official site in the last week. So one of those dots there turns from blue to yellow or red, which is a good thing. It means they're in the network, but now they're working on getting things up and running. So Dr. Norris will be able to answer more questions about that. So our featured speaker, as I've mentioned several times, is Dr. Gary Norritz. He is the director of the Comprehensive Cerebral Palsy Program at Nationwide Children's and also a professor of pediatrics at Ohio State University. He's not only a developmental pediatrician, but he's an internist. So he treats adults as well as kids, which puts him in a fascinating position to be the principal investigator of the CPRN registry. He's a co-founder of the whole network, has been working with me from the very beginning, and he's been on the founding executive committee ever since. And he's also a member of the adult study group, in addition to all the other research that he conducts. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and I am going to hand control to Dr. Norritz. Gary, you want to see if you can take control? Or if
First I will unmute, and then I will see if I can take control.
Great.
These are big things for me. Let's see. I don't know about taking control, but actually,
go to the bottom and click on share screen, and you should be able to share your screen.
Okay. Yeah, you know what? I got ahead of myself trying to run the thing here. Go to the bottom. Go to share screen. You know, it's not like I haven't been on Zoom all day or anything like that. Share screen. Very good.
That looks good.
We have it? Okay. All right, real good. Well, thanks everybody, and thanks for joining me and giving me a little bit of your time. Like Paul said, I'm Gary Norritz. I work at Nationwide Children's Hospital, and I take care of both kids and adults with CP and other developmental problems. A lot of what my interest is in how doctors use the electronic medical record, which is this sort of big boondoggle that some would say we're cursed with as doctors and other health professionals. For me, I think there's a real opportunity there. But we, as a group of doctors and providers and stuff, are, sort of have come to really resent the electronic medical record. And if you go to the doctor and you see that, the doctor's sort of cranky and typing away on the computer instead of looking at a person while they're, in the office, you get a sense of, really what the problem is. And as always, The Onion, I think, has put it best in that, the auto industry, for instance, the oil change, they've been ahead of us for a long, long time. They know what my car needs, and they can get me in and they get me out, and I know what I'm going to pay before I get in, and that whole thing. So I want to sort of keep this in mind as I go through what happens with the registry, because what I think of how I think of the registry is a way for the medical record to start working for doctors and patients instead of solely working for the hospital. And so let me get to it. So you know a little about CPRN already. This part of the presentation specifically crafted for the CP community. If I do use any terms that are unfamiliar, please let me know, because I'm not trying to be opaque with them. As Paul mentioned, the CPRN is a group of doctors, therapists, patient advocates. What we want to do is improve treatment and outcomes for people with CP. And a big part of that is the CPRN clinical registry. And what this is the care that people are receiving at the CPRN sites. Instead of all that data purely being used to take care of that specific patient and purely going into that patient's medical record, we try to aggregate all of that data so that it's more useful to take care, to see what's happening with the care of people with CP overall. So that data that, for instance, I collect at my clinic, is in that patient's medical record, but it's then anonymized. The private health information is taken out of it, but it's then sent to a central site where all of that data can be combined into this large registry. And from that registry, we can do lots of different things. We can see how people are faring with their CP. We can examine what the treatments that people are getting with their CP. And it's also a platform that we can use for planning and launching research studies. And so, we're all about clinical care. We're about improving the quality of care. We're about finding new ways to deliver care and new care to be delivered. And as a network, it's nice that we sort of have all this infrastructure around already to hang these different things on. And so currently we have 27 centers, as Paul mentioned. This red one right here, that's Cincinnati. And they're now, I think, yellow, meaning they've taken a step forward. 10 of these centers are contributing data, at least some data from parts of their various CP programs. And so, for instance, at certain centers, it might be just the neurosurgeon or just the orthopedist or just the physical medicine doctor. And other sites are more completely rolled out. And so we have, it's not unusual that we have like, 3 centers a year or so coming online. So there are 3 sort of queued up right now that will be getting more, that will be starting to get their data at the coordinating center. So what happened, and this goes back a few years now, is we as a network got together, and we got together both as a large group, pediatricians, physical medicine doctors, neurologists, orthopedists, physical therapists, neurosurgeons, occupational therapists, community members. We got together as a big group to talk about what is it that we want to find out from the CP registry. And then we got together into smaller groups, like the neurosurgeons got together to talk about the data that they wanted to collect. And not just the data that they wanted to collect because they were interested in for research purposes, but the data that they need to collect in order to take good care of patients. And so there was a neurosurgery group, there was an orthopedic group. There was the group I was involved with, we called the non-surgeon physicians, which essentially was developmental pediatricians, physical medicine doctors, and neurologists. And so, we had like our piece of it, the therapists had their own group and so on. And the point of the registry is to not have a parallel data entry system as happens in other registries. Our goal really, and this is the way that we were hoping to really do it with a good value and quickly, was to get the data that's actually being collected during the clinical encounter. And so what happens, for instance, in my clinic is as I'm seeing the patient and as I'm entering the data into the clinical note that I use for my medical record keeping and for billing, of course, and for the patient's medical record, all that data simultaneously goes into another research database. And all of that is what flows to the centralized data repository, again, with the identification things being scrubbed out. The Institutional Review Board, which is essentially the committee at a hospital or a university that protects the rights and safety of research subjects, approves these studies. And so our Institutional Review Board approved the study. Because we're in a network of other children's hospitals, there were certain other hospitals that were able to use our approval. And so if they don't use our approval, they have approval at their own sites. And so all of this does go through a fairly rigorous safety check to make sure that the rights of research participants are being protected. Now, who are the research participants? Are the patients that we're taking care of. And so this is, again, one of our core tenets, is that we want to get as much data as we can from people as we're actually taking care of them. So I'm going to go through some of the data that we've collected. Again, pretty broad strokes, and not getting into a whole lot of detail or correlations or trying to predict why things are the way they are. But one thing that I'll ask you to keep in mind as I go through is to realize that this is this is not a representative sample. It's a convenience sample, which means it's the people that are coming to the clinics at these 27 centers, or the 10 that are providing data anyway. And so, and there are specific reasons why somebody might come to our center or not come to our center. And so you can't take this as like the data that I'm going to show and say, oh, well, this is how CP is for all people in the United States. Again, there are particularities about these centers. And of course, Toronto is one of our centers, not in the United States. Okay, so let's get into it. On the left here, we have patient age. This is the age at the time of their most recent data clinic visit. You'll see that roughly 20% of the patients in the sample here are adults. That we know is not representative of people with CP across the United States, but that's what's coming to the centers right now. And of the centers that are coming online pretty soon, some of them have larger adult programs than some of the programs that are already collecting. In terms of gestational age, when the people were born, a fair bit were preemies, but 40% were definitely term babies. Oop, I'm on the wrong screen, sorry. Gender, 55% male, 44% female. And that's pretty consistent with what we believe is the natural prevalence in the United States, that there's a slight male predominance of patients with CP. I'll point out also that this N of 1965, that means there are 1,965 individual patients with data in the registry. Now, some of these patients have multiple visits over multiple years of data, but we're counting each person just once, no matter how many times they have data. In terms of race, it's a predominantly white sample. Again, may well be related to the centers that are currently online. Etiology, or the cause of the CP, this is the sort of breakdown, and you'll see that there's really many different things that were charted here as the cause of CP. Now, this is what the provider, physician, nurse practitioner, therapist, or whoever who is taking care of the patient charted as the cause of that patient's CP. So often we don't really know, but we have some idea. And it's the judgment of that particular clinical person as to what was put on here. And the thing that I think out of all this, to some extent, is really most interesting is this 16% of patients that have CP where the cause is, even after everybody has sort of gathered whatever data and thought about it, is unknown. And that's a big, I think, focus of some of the people in our clinical research network, is to investigate those people where we can't figure out why they have cerebral palsy, and look for the genetic underpinnings of the syndrome. We collect quite a bit of different clinical information, and this is maybe the sort of most basic and the most consistently collected one. It's called the Gross Motor Functional Classification System. And it's a 1 through 5 scale, essentially with how well does a person move about their environment. And 1 is the most independent and 5 is the least independent. And it's very well illustrated here on the left, kind of what it means to be someone with CP level 1 or level 4 or what have you. And the arrangement here, which I would describe as sort of like a U or a V, where there's quite a bit of level 1 patients, there's quite a bit of patients with level 5 CP, and it sort of is less in the middle. We believe that that's actually also what we see in across the board in cerebral palsy. And so at least this makes us sort of happy that we're hoping not an exactly representative sample, but we're getting close to that in the terms of what functional, in terms of gross motor function, what people are able to do. And there's not a whole lot of missing data on this one because everyone sort of agrees that this is a very important data point to capture. We also have an occupational therapy score called the Manual Ability Classification System. It's modeled after the earlier one, the gross motor classification system. 1 is the best, 5 is the least independent. And you'll see here that the number is quite a bit smaller because only some of the centers collect these data points. But this is the spread across those centers that do collect the data points. Topography refers to what parts of the body are affected by cerebral palsy, and there's sort of debate within the research community about how to describe this. And to some extent, what we've settled on right now is that patients either have bilateral problems or they have unilateral problems. But even people with bilateral problems tend to be maybe worse on one side or better on one side, and those patients we call triplegia. But we used to say hemiplegia, and that to some extent we're now coding as unilateral cerebral palsy. And the vast majority of patients in this sample are what we're terming bilateral symmetric cerebral palsy. And that includes both the patients that were originally or previously classified as diplegic, which meant just the legs, or quadriplegic, meaning both the legs and the arms. The reason for this is that even patients that have diplegia, and this is sort of illustrated here, not only their legs are affected, their arms are affected too, but less so. And so this comes back a little bit to thinking about the neuroanatomy of cerebral palsy to say that there's disease on one side of the brain or there's disease on both sides of the brain. Motor type refers to the kind of movements or tone disorders that the person have, and the vast majority here have spastic cerebral palsy. It's interesting that some of my labels are missing, but I don't know why that is like that. But anyway, the orange, this sort of big orange one here, this is what we called mixed cerebral palsy, where there's more than one type, usually a mixture of spastic cerebral palsy and dystonic cerebral palsy. We have a few patients that have hypotonic cerebral palsy or loose muscles. And there's some patients with athetosis and chorea, but these are, and these sort of wild abnormal movements, those are less prevalent. Oop. All right, sorry. Now, tone assessment, there are different ways that doctors who take care of tone assess tone. There's like different systems for describing the tone, and the ones that are kind of most often used are Ashworth or modifications of it, or Tardieu or modifications of it. And I put this up here not because I think it's necessarily all that interesting whether somebody uses Ashworth or Tardieu, but I'm putting this up because I want to make the point that the CPRN registry doesn't, at this point certainly, is not telling people, clinicians, how they ought to practice. What we're trying to do is capture the way that they are practicing. And so if a particular physician likes to use Ashworth, more power to him or her, and we have created ways to capture that data. And if they prefer Tardieu, that's great, they can do Tardieu, and we've captured that data. One of the things that may happen over time is we may see that people gravitate towards one or the other as they see what, as we share what our practice is across the network. And then the other thing that may happen is that when we are doing research studies down the road, we may say, we're looking, you can be one of our sites for a research project into this treatment for spasticity, but we need you to collect it all in modified Ashworth scoring. And so we already know who uses modified Ashworth and who doesn't. About a third of the patients have seizures currently. The other group, I actually wish I had this broken down into never or seizures in the past, but about a third have active seizures, and that's the next webinar is going to be about people with CP and epilepsy. Vision status, there's quite a bit of people with impaired vision. It's one of the core things that we see with cerebral palsy is vision and also hearing problems. Although in this sample anyway, hearing problems were not quite as prevalent. In terms of feeding or eating, almost half, or a little bit more than half, don't need any kind of supplemental tube feed or anything like that, but almost half do. And some of it is people who eat some and use a tube some, and some are really only tube fed. And for here, G-tube means gastrostomy into the stomach, J-tube means jejunostomy into the intestine, and then the GJ tube is just a particular way to put the tube into the intestine. Nearly a third with sleep problems, and a small number with pain. And we look at this and we wonder why, because we think that pain really is a very prevalent problem in people with cerebral palsy. We can speculate, and this is one of the things about the data, is we can then say, well, why is this? One of the ideas is maybe it's because we have a generally younger sample, and maybe children are not having as much pain as older children or adults. Maybe they're not able to report pain that they are having. And so this is, again, one of the questions that we can get to when we delve deeper into the registry. There's also a good amount of surgical data. So the surgeons who are working with us, neurosurgeons and orthopedists, are capturing very specific data about their surgeries, the technique of their surgeries, and the outcomes of their surgeries. And with our network, with the registry part of the network, we also have lots of before and after data in terms of how well somebody's was functioning from a gross motor standpoint, or what their spasticity was. Selective dorsal rhizotomy is a surgery on the spinal cord to reduce spasticity. In a baclofen pump is an implanted device that delivers baclofen directly into the spinal fluid. Those are both neurosurgical procedures. And then there's a whole, gamut of orthopedic surgeries, and we're collecting everything that happens spine and lower limb. I don't think we're collecting anything arm, shoulder, or hand surgeries just yet, but that could be something down the road. Okay, so what happens next since we have, again, this, fairly large database at this point, nearly 2,000 patients. It grows essentially every week as new patients come to the CP centers. We are always looking to expand both the breadth and the depth of the data that we're collecting, to try and get more information about what's happening to people with cerebral palsy. One of the exciting things is that we're able to follow patients over time. And so at our center, we are collecting some data right out of the neonatal ICU, using the same kinds of forms that I use in my clinic when I see patients, and our oldest patients in our adult CP program are in their 60s and 70s. And so, when I think about, is there a legacy I'm going to have in medicine? To me, this is probably the thing for me, in that this thing can go on forever, as long as we use computers to take care of patients. The database will always be growing, and so on. So we have several studies planned, as Paul mentioned in the beginning. There's a few things that are already in process, some that are being planned. We are here collecting more data to describe epilepsy in patients with CP. Again, that's the subject of the next webinar. We have a big project that we're trying to get going about spasticity management, comparing one technique to another. Our colleague, Dr. Michael Kruer, who's at Phoenix Children's Hospital, has a grant to look into the genetic underpinnings of cerebral palsy, and we are able to work with him to identify patients who might want to be a part of that study. We have quality improvement projects around reducing infections for the intrathecal baclofen pumps. That's an unfortunate complication that we see too often, and we really wish we didn't. We're looking into the impact of practice variation, which is sort of one of these just interesting things that if you come to the cerebral palsy program at Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, you may get very different care than you get, or you'll get some difference in care than you'll get from Cincinnati, which is 150 miles to our south, or Akron, which is 150 miles to our north. And so we're trying to figure out what the impact of those different practice variations are. And the last one that we spent a good bit of time yesterday sort of pitching around is how can we optimize hip surveillance to reduce the hip dislocations that many people with cerebral palsy get and pain in their hips that many people with cerebral palsy get. So that is it for my presentation. I'm happy to take questions. I'm happy to go back over some of the data if you like. Before I get to that, I will throw the pitch back in next Tuesday, May 5th. Not next Tuesday, but Tuesday, May 5th, Cinco de Mayo, which we'll all be celebrating at home. 8 o'clock Eastern. Adam Ostendorf, who's one of my favorite people, and he's a neurologist at our hospital, Nationwide Children's. He's going to talk about the preliminary findings of epilepsy from the CPRN registry. So, Paul, how do we do questions?
I think we should try, with 28 people online, I think we should try hand raising, and I will call people out, and if they're muted, they can unmute and start to ask the question. So I'm just going to take this in order. Please be patient. Alexis, you're up.
Hi, this is Alexis. Doctor, I just wanted to thank you for treating adults with CP. I'm 22,
sure.
And I've just aged out of my pediatric services. And I and many others are finding that we don't know where to go now because there's a huge gap between pediatrics and geriatrics. And if you don't have the background in developmental peds, you often don't know how to treat somebody with a childhood condition. So thank you for that. And a comment about pain, you might already know this, but in my particular case, I didn't realize that I was in pain until after I received my baclofen pump. Mm-hmm. And I realized that spasticity could be decreased because I was so tight all the time. I'm a spastic quad, and because I was so tight all the time, I didn't realize that you actually could control muscles in your body. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I realized that I was actually experiencing pain when it wasn't constantly there. So. Yeah.
I mean, it's really interesting for people that have chronic pain and maybe, and who have grown up with chronic pain. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Mm-hmm. When it just seems to be the background of your life, you maybe don't recognize that it's there. And as far as adult care for CP, we're working on it. That's the best I can say.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to find out more about Nationwide and everything. So
all right.
Maybe we'll connect after this.
Yep. Shoot me an email.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I don't know if it's the hour or the I'm shy when I'm in front of 27 other people, but we don't have any other hands raised, or you can. Oh, it looks like somebody typed in a question. I was wondering if you're looking at secondary conditions as well that may seem to be associated with CP, such as scoliosis, which my son developed after orthopedic surgery.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. We're capturing data on scoliosis and cerebral palsy. Scoliosis obviously is a huge part of the care that the orthopedists give. There are all these sort of unknowns in medicine where I can pick on orthopedic surgery and say there are all these unknowns in orthopedic surgery. And so I can say that, for instance, one of the things I love talking to orthopedists about is when you have somebody with bad scoliosis and dislocated hips, which should you fix first? And I would say that there's a good bit of opinion on that. If you get, it's one of these things, if you get two doctors together, you can get three opinions. And so, that's just part of the discussion. And that's the kind of thing that I hope that we'll be able to contribute some data to say that, well, these people got their hips fixed first, these people got their scoliosis fixed first, and here's what their outcomes were. But yeah, no, we're secondary complications like like scoliosis. We're looking into that. Like osteoporosis, we're looking at. We have data that we collect around that. Sleep, bowel bladder function, feeding problems, constipation, reflux. As a developmental pediatrician internist, my interest is the big picture, and so I'm looking at things pretty broadly.
So the next question, Paul, I see your hand is up plus your question is there. So you can, if you want, you can unmute and ask your question. If you prefer me to read it, I will just read away.
Sure, I'll come off you. Are you looking for patients who are pretty independent to come to one of your centers for data collection?
Well, so we're, the point of coming to the center, the point would be to get clinical care. And we are happy to provide clinical care at the centers to people that, want an evaluation and need have a particular problem they want to get solved, or just want, kind of what we term in our center the CP checkup, the annual CP sort of once over. So from that standpoint, that's who I wouldn't say that we're sort of advertising to get research participants. We're trying to provide care to people that need care. Now, Paul Gross, you may be able to say something about how CPRN and MyCP works in terms of study recruitment.
Yeah, and I will say, and I mean, Paul, I don't believe we've ever met, but I certainly know your name and you've been a very engaged community member for quite some time, which I appreciate. And I know you're a member of MyCP, but I would say to all of the adults and parents and clinicians interested in research, join MyCP, but for the adults, that we have a set of parallel data collection to the registry. It's not as rich as the registry, but it is intended to both track what's going on with you medically. So a bunch of the forms that Dr. Norris would fill in when seeing you, you can fill those in, and they're annual. We're just about to roll over and do the annual request. We have to fix some things in the software. So that we get that kind of longitudinal view, and you can say whether or not you've had a surgery and whatnot. So I would say you don't need to go to a center. I think the idea is we're actually up to 27 centers, but I expect we'll be at about 32 before the end of the year. We really believe that what we're building is going to not only accelerate research, but really alter care. And a lot of our focus over the next 5 years is about how we can sort of implement some best practices, and that's really in the form of quality improvement, where you look to see that you're getting the outcome that's desirable, and you sort of tweak the way you treat to improve that outcome. And so no, don't travel on behalf of this, but continue to keep an eye on the longitudinal studies and the new studies that get promoted through MyCP. We actually I haven't announced them yet, but we've just launched 2 pediatric focused studies. I'm going to announce them in the coming week. We've been very focused on the adult studies so far, so it's an exciting time. So thanks for your question. Did that get your question answered, Paul?
Yeah, I'll definitely participate. I definitely think I have some good data from a success standpoint. So I definitely want to share that with everybody.
Great. That's great to hear. All right, I see Amanda, you have your hand up. Do you want to unmute or type question? Up to you.
I've got it unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. My daughter is,
Oh, now you're muted.
I may have done that accidentally. I was trying
Uh-oh.
to.
How
Right.
rude.
I did that accidentally. I apologize, Amanda.
that's okay. My daughter is, she's going to be 7 this year, and she's a patient at Cincinnati Children's. So I'm actually really glad to hear that they've come on board as a, as a partner here. And I was
Yeah.
just curious to know if there were any particular things that they are going to be doing in the near future in regards to research, if you were aware of that. And my daughter does experience a lot of the things that you had previously mentioned in regards to sleep disturbances and epilepsy and feeding and constipation, all of those things.
Sure. Although Cincinnati is in some ways as an institution just coming on board now, they've been really involved from the get-go. And Amy Bales, who is one of the physical therapists who works there, she's a member of our steering committee and has been, just a great partner. Gilda Vargas Adams, who's my counterpart at Cincinnati, she's been involved again from the beginning. She helped us develop those forms that we use. In terms of their research interest, I don't know that I can speak sort of intelligently about that. I can tell you that they have, really a premier quality improvement apparatus at Cincinnati Children's, and so I know that they're always working on things in that vein. But it's a great place, and so I'm always impressed to hear what comes out of there.
Yeah. I would add, just so you know, Amanda, just to set your expectations. So first of all, I think there are a number of CP related research projects that are just not being done as multi-center research as part of CPRN. They've got a kind of a great team, and then Jim McCarthy, who's an orthopedic surgeon, is driving a bunch of quality improvement work around orthopedics for CP. Amy Bales, who, as Gary said, is on our executive committee, is driving a bunch of work around. She's looking at doing things about physical therapy dose, and she's got a study proposal that's in our pipeline. But the person that joined taking the leadership is the neurosurgeon, Dr. Chuck Stevenson. And so that means my guess is their initial data collection around the registry is going to be centered around the neurosurgeries that they're doing for baclofen pumps and selective dorsal rhizotomy. So you should feel free to give them the feedback that they need to expand their areas of data collection, but they are getting on board, and they have really been participating since the beginning, just not on the data collection front.
Oh, that's great. My daughter actually sees Dr. Vargas Adams, so I did get the chance to meet Amy Bales when I came to the CPRN conference that we had a couple years ago. So,
right.
And my daughter will also be seeing Dr. McCarthy later this year. So,
well, so you're in good capable hands. There is one more question that I see, which is Gail is saying 21-year-old with spastic diplegia looking for a gynecologist. Any recommendations? Gail, you'd have to give us a region, I suspect, but we very often just not that it's in Indiana. Okay. We know people we can ask just because the network has Indiana's a site. It's Riley, so it's the PED side, but very often the providers know who is in the system overall, and so we can reach out. If you want to send me an email, I'd be glad to take a look. I'm paul@cprn.org, and I'd reach out to people in the network. And then I assume you can see that Shira Greenberg is saying Michigan and Chicago might have OBGYN. So Hope that helps. Any other questions from the group? All righty. Let me say thank you all for attending. Really appreciate you spending the time on a Thursday evening. Dr. Noritz, thank you so much for taking the time to sort of turn this into a lay-friendly presentation, and I really appreciate it. And this is recorded, and we will post it for the probably 100 or so other people that wanted to participate but couldn't make the time this evening. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
They'll do curb six. You give me your number so you can curb set.